When you think about American food, it's hard not to think about burgers, fries, and of course, ice-cold refreshing cola. But which one? Many immediately jump to Coca-Cola, but Pepsi-Cola has been around almost as long, and in some ways, the story of the underdog Pepsi is just as fascinating. Over the last 125 plus years, Pepsi-Cola has faced a number of challenges from competitors. Numerous legal battles, went bankrupt on multiple occasions, and yet somehow they are with us today, stronger than ever. And PepsiCo has a bigger presence than many realize. But what was the secret sauce that enabled Pepsi to survive such a long and turbulent history? As it turns out, it was riffs on the world scene, some genius marketing decisions, some hard-learned lessons, as well as dumb luck that led them to be where they're at today. But mostly it was trying lots of different things until something finally worked. And don't worry, we're serving up some of that sweet, fizzy, random trivia goodness at the end. In the late 1800s, Caleb Davis Bradham would open his own drugstore in New Bern, North Carolina, after family matters pulled him from medical school. Bradham set out to create a refreshing drink that could aid digestion and boost energy without all of the impurities or strong narcotics found in other fountain drinks of the time. Originally called Brad's Drink, the 1893 formula was made from sugar, cola nuts, lemon oil, nutmeg, and other ingredients. In 1898, the drink was renamed Pepsi-Cola, and in 1902, the Pepsi-Cola company was officially formed. By 1910, Pepsi-Cola was selling over 100,000 gallons of syrup a year. Not bad for an upstart, even in comparison to Coca-Cola's 1 million gallons plus annually. But there was something sinister on the horizon. Dub 1. During these times, commodities like sugar can be very hard to get, and prices eventually skyrocketed by over 500%. Bradham bought sugar and sugar futures at inflated prices, thinking they would continue to rise. And as sugar prices fell just as quickly, this led to bankruptcy in 1923. Over the next few years, despite prohibition being a boon to soft drinks everywhere, Pepsi changed hands a number of times with little traction. Meanwhile, the Loft Candy Company had been selling a ton of Coca-Cola in their stores when their president, Charles Guth, asked Coke for a discount based on their high volumes and the hard economic climate. They laughed him out of Coca-Cola headquarters. So in 1931, Guth decided to buy Pepsi. But in the midst of the Great Depression, serving Pepsi instead of Coke at all the Loft stores soon appeared to be an enormous mistake, as patrons just didn't want to try something new. So bad was their financial state that Guth went back to Coca-Cola to offer up Pepsi for sale. But they refused to even make an offer, and their chortles and guffaws were heard even louder this time. Pepsi looked like it was destined to become just another forgotten name in the annals of yesteryear. Pepsi kept trying though. They reformulated Pepsi and relabeled old 12-ounce beer bottles, charging 10 cents a bottle. But people were used to paying 5 cents regardless of the size, and so it just didn't take off. Remember, this was the Depression, 5 cents was a lot. But somebody at Pepsi had the bright idea to cut the 12-ounce price in half to only 5 cents a bottle. And while profit margins would be razor thin, with enough volume it could work. Some of the slogans were twice as much for a nickel and America's biggest nickel drink. Inside of 6 months, they went from near bankruptcy to turning a $100,000 profit, and by 1939 that had jumped to nearly $5 million. Coca-Cola was nervous, and with good reason, but another world scene change was in the offing, Dub 2. Surprisingly, Coca-Cola got the government to treat their drinks as a wartime necessity, and they secured rights to provide Cokes to the military, and here's the kicker, any Cokes that went to servicemen were excluded from the sugar ration. But in this regard, Pepsi was on their own. They bought a plantation in Cuba and set up their own refining plant stateside, but the US government still put this sugar supply under rationing laws. So they imported sugar from Mexico in syrup form called El Masco. Though some didn't like the taste as much, it got them through. Some of their ads promoted the purchase of Liberty bonds, and Pepsi adopted red, white, and blue as their official colors to further show their patriotic spirit. Several Pepsi-Cola centers were set up for servicemen and women where they could write letters or record a personal message on a record to send to their loved ones back home. And of course, all the free Pepsi-Cola they could drink. And while all these efforts further reinforced Pepsi's brand, 10 billion bottles of Coca-Cola were ultimately consumed during Dub 2 by servicemen and women. Coca-Cola entered into the post-war era feeling invincible. The unexpected post-war inflation made matters even worse for Pepsi. After trying several variations of bottle sizes and prices, as 1950 approached, some predicted Pepsi would go belly up, before the new decade had even begun. But salvation was to come by way of a former advertising genius from none other than Pepsi's biggest rival, Coca-Cola. Alfred Steele's bold style never really worked at Coca-Cola, but Pepsi disagreed and eventually hired him, where he became president in 1950. He knew he had to stop the downward spiral, and it was with the ad campaign of more bounce to the ounce that Pepsi stopped focusing on value and shifted to image, in ads that showed people enjoying themselves like nobody's business, while of course drinking a Pepsi-Cola. They promoted this through television, radio, and print media, but TV ads had an unexpected benefit. All of a sudden, people started to view Pepsi as the drink you had while in front of the TV, so supermarket sales of their so-called take-home products increased significantly. And to pay for this campaign, they sold that Cuban sugar plantation for a cool $4 million, among other assets. And though the ads were working, Steele also knew that no matter how much Pepsi corporate advertised, the bottlers still had to do their part in convincing local retailers to carry Pepsi-Cola. That's how it worked then. And so Steele tried to repair a long-standing divide between the bottlers and Pepsi by making it clear that the bottler's success was everyone's success, and open up direct lines of communication back to corporate. There was also an issue of consistency in the flavor, so he developed a program to modernize bottling machinery as well as send out mobile labs to test products on the ground and catch problems early. Pepsi also promoted vending machines by offering easy financing, where they began to appear most notably at gas stations as the golden age of the automobile was in full swing. In 1953, they reformulated Pepsi to be lighter as the Depression-era need for calorie-rich products had faded away, and a new slogan, "The Light Refreshment," was introduced. In 1955, Steele's brash personality came through twice, once with the largest display ever at Times Square in New York, and again at the opening of Disneyland. The 1950s had a slew of other promotions and slogans, and so it was arguably the greatest period of growth and expansion in the company's history. And by 1959, sales had skyrocketed to more than $157 million. While Coke was focused on serving their now older clientele by maintaining the status quo, Pepsi decided to mix it up a bit and go after their kids. They chose to ignore a huge demographic, made possible in part because Pepsi was now run by a team of people rather than just one overbearing CEO. In 1961, Pepsi launches Come Alive, You're in the Pepsi Generation. This is the seed of the mindset where Coke is definitely the original, but somewhat dated choice, and Pepsi is what you go with if you're young and want to be hip. In 1965, Pepsi and Frito-Lay merge, forming PepsiCo, and create what would become one of the largest snack conglomerations still in existence today. Coke eventually shot back in 1971 with that famous commercial, "I'd love to teach the world to sing." But in some ways it was too little too late, as Pepsi's market share continued to climb. In 1975, they came up with the Pepsi Challenge TV ad showing 50% of participants preferred the taste of Pepsi over Coca-Cola. It was a smashing success, pivotal in Pepsi going from distant competitor to breathing down the neck of Coke. In 1977, PepsiCo bought Pizza Hut and the next year Taco Bell, not just as an investment in fast food, but a way for Pepsi soft drinks to be exclusively served with all that salty food. The 1980s were huge, as one slogan called Pepsi the new generation, with Michael Jackson, the hottest pop star in existence, promoting Pepsi on that famous TV commercial during the 1984 Grammys. And in 1985, Coca-Cola announced New Coke, which had people protesting in the streets. That blunder briefly allowed Pepsi to surpass Coke for the first time ever. And by 1986, they had even acquired KFC. 1994 had Starbucks and PepsiCo jointly founding the North American Coffee Partnership, which is why today you can easily find iced coffee drinks in bottles. They now claim over 90% market share. And in the same year, Aquafina water was launched. In 1998, PepsiCo acquired Tropicana, in 2000 Quaker Oats, and Gatorade in 2001. In 2005, the revenue went from about $32 billion, steadily increasing to over $63 billion in 2017. And as of 2017, Pepsi had about 31% market share of the carbonated soft drink market versus Coca-Cola's 42%. But PepsiCo has almost double the revenue. From a small upstart that went bankrupt multiple times to a global powerhouse and worthy competitor to Coke, Pepsi has beaten the odds over and over. Before we talk about all the random trivia goodness and my final wrap-up, I just wanted to take a moment to let you know another way you can support my efforts. I put dozens of hours into researching, writing, and editing every single video, and of course, your YouTube subscription is always appreciated. But if you want to become a superstar and help me create more frequent content, consider becoming a patron. Thank you so much. So now some fun trivia that is sure to pop your top and chase that indigestion away. Many people think that pepsin was part of the Pepsi-Cola formula at some point, but that just isn't true. Bradham believed his beverage was helpful in digestion, and Pepsi came from the word dyspepsia, which means indigestion. Between 1922 and 1933, the Coca-Cola Company was offered the purchase of the Pepsi Company 3 separate times and declined each one of them. Unconfirmed reports say Coke is currently working on a time machine to rectify those blunders, and rumor also has it that Elon Musk is a big investor in the technology. I'll throw a Benjamin their way. Some celebrities to endorse Pepsi have included Sofia Vergara, Jeff Gordon, Britney Spears, Shaq, the Spice Girls, Nicki Minaj, Kendall Jenner, and Beyonce, among many others. Pepsi was the first American product to be manufactured, marketed, and sold in the Soviet Union back in the early 70s. But in 1990, they renegotiated a deal to exchange Pepsi syrup for a vodka and a small fleet of Soviet warships, including a cruiser, a frigate, a destroyer, and 17 subs. That just sounds so weird to me. Did you know that Apple and Pepsi have some history? Well, kind of. Steve Jobs hired Pepsi's then president John Sculley away to become Apple CEO in 1983. Jono, you really should have stayed at Pepsi if you ask me. Pepsi Japan has produced some crazy flavors over the years, like Pepsi Pink, which is strawberry milk flavored, Pepsi Salty Watermelon, which apparently is pretty good, and Pepsi Ice Cucumber, which I guess was pretty awful. Okay, so what is the secret to Pepsi-Cola's success? Well, instead of being stopped by obstacles, they tried to step over them. They adapted constantly, often making risky decisions that sometimes paid off. And they were not afraid to branch out both in and out of the beverage space. It is said that some things need to die in order for other things to live. In Pepsi's case, some Pepsi companies and ideas along the way had to die in order for the Pepsi drink to live on. And whether you are a Coke or Pepsi fan, it's always good to have some formidable competition, don't you think? So, what do you think about PepsiCo as a company, or even the Pepsi drink itself? Also, tell me what other video topics you might like to see on companies, history, food, or anything else really, and I'll consider it. In fact, there was so much I wanted to cover on Pepsi, but I just didn't have the time. So would you like to see a series on Pepsi, or a series on other companies? How about Coca-Cola, or the so-called Cola Wars? Let me know in the comments. This is 2-Bit History. Thanks for watching.